Hello and welcome. Today's lesson is on variation. Trust me, you're going to enjoy it. Like always, this lesson is going to be very interactive with lots of practical examples. Are you ready? Let's roll the intro. Do you know that subscribing to this channel will help you improve in your math? You know why I say this by the end of this lesson. Now let's begin. When we say variation, what are we talking about? Sometimes two or more quantities are related in such a way that a change in one is going to cause a change in the other. Basically, that is what variation means. When quantities are related in such a way that a change in one causes a change in the other. Let's take this example. For instance, your income and then your expenditure. We realize that these quantities are related in such a way that when your income changes, it is going to affect your expenditure. So that when you get more money, you're probably going to purchase more goods. Let's take another example, the time you spend on studying mathematics or any other subject. But let's just focus on maths because we are doing mathematics here. The time you spend on studying mathematics also has a relation with your performance in mathematics. So if you study more maths, you're going to do well in mathematics. If you don't study well, or if you don't study more mathematics, then you're not going to perform well. So the time you spend on studying will have a relation with your performance in the subject. Think of your health also. It also depends on some other factors like your diet, your sleep, and other things. So if your diet should change, it's going to affect your health, well, positively or negatively. And then if your sleep should also change, it's going to affect your health. So if you have enough sleep, your health is going to improve. And if you do not sleep well, imagine you sleep just 1 hour in a day or two, then your health is going to be affected. It's going to go down. So that is variation. Your health depends on two or more quantities. In this case, I mentioned your diet and then your sleep. So there are so many quantities that are related in such a way that a change in one will cause a change in the other. I just spoke about income and then expenditure. Let me write them here. Income is related to expenditure. And then the time you spend in studying will also have an effect on your performance. And then we said your health also depends on, this time not one, but we are talking about your diet and then your sleep. Of course, your health will depend on some other things also, but we just want to focus on just these two, your diet and then your sleep. So you realize that is variation. Quantities depend on other quantities. So a change in one is going to cause a change in the other. So basically, when we talk about variation, this is what we mean. When a quantity depends on one or more quantities, so that a change in a quantity is going to cause a change in the other quantity or quantities. Now, let's talk about some types of variation. In this lesson, we'll be discussing types of variation. We'll talk about we'll talk about direct variation. We'll talk about inverse or indirect variation. Inverse or indirect variation. We'll talk about joint variation. And then finally, we'll talk about partial variation. Partial variation. Let me add the variation to these ones also. Inverse variation and direct variation. All right, so these are the ones we'll be talking about. So let's quickly see what direct variation is. Direct variation. So when we talk about direct variation, we're talking about a kind of relationship between quantities such that an increase in one is going to cause an increase in the other, and a decrease in one is going to cause a decrease in the other. So we say that when one quantity increases, let's say quantity A increases, it is going to cause an increase in quantity B. Quantity B will also increase when A increases. They have the same direction. And let's say if quantity A should reduce, should fall, quantity B should also fall. Okay, then that is direct variation. The relationship is direct. Now let's think of this one. We already spoke about income and expenditure. So when you get more money, then you're going to buy more goods. It's direct. If you don't have money, if your income should reduce, then you cannot purchase so much goods. So then if you had a purchasing power, if you were able to buy so many things before, now since your income has reduced, then you cannot buy so many things as you used to. But then if your income should increase, then you're going to purchase more. So that is direct. Yeah, when we get money, when we have money, we buy more things. When we don't, we are not able to buy more. It is direct. Think of this one also. We spoke about the time you spend in studying mathematics. If you spend more time in studying, for instance, if you spend more time visiting this YouTube channel, studying mathematics, going through our videos, it is definitely going to help you perform better in your mathematics. So I'll encourage you to continue to do that. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that now, so that you'll be visiting the channel when we post videos. You enjoy these videos, and then your performance in mathematics is going to increase. So that is also direct variation. When you spend more time studying, it is going to reflect in your performance. Your performance will also improve. That's an example of direct variation. We'll spend more time talking about direct variation in a video we'll make only on direct variation. We'll do that for all the other types. So now we're just trying to explain what direct variation, or what the types of variations are. Now let's talk about indirect or inverse variation. Inverse variation. When we say inverse variation, what does it mean? Well, if for direct variation an increase in one will cause an increase in the other, what do you think indirect will be? For indirect variation, an increase in one quantity, let's say quantity A, if quantity A should increase, it should cause a decrease in quantity B. That is inverse variation or indirect variation. An increase in one quantity, this time is not causing an increase, but it's rather causing a decrease in the other quantity. So you're going to have an inverse effect. That is why we call it the inverse variation. So if quantity A is increasing, it's going to cause a decrease in quantity B. And if quantity A should reduce, it's going to cause an increase in quantity B. That is, let's think of some examples of inverse or indirect variation. Now think of this. If you are supposed to travel a distance from one town to another, and if it takes you a particular number of hours at a particular speed, imagine you increase the speed. You increase the speed you use in traveling. What will happen to the time that you spend traveling? The time is going to reduce when you increase the speed, and when you reduce the speed, the time is going to increase. Now let's take an example. This time I want to just write it down so that you can follow along. Imagine that we are traveling from, let's say, town K to town T. We are traveling this distance from town K to town T. And the driver decides to drive at 80 kilometers per hour. And it takes him, let's say, 4 hours. 4 hours to travel from town K to town T. Now, the driver increases the speed from 80 to, let's say, 120 kilometers per hour. What do you think? Do you think that when the driver increases the speed from 120 kilometers per hour, what do you think? If the driver increases from 80 to 120 kilometers per hour, will the time that it will take us, will the time spent on the journey increase or reduce? What do you think? Yeah, the time is going to reduce because now we are speeding. So the time that we're going to spend on the road is going to reduce. So it's no longer going to be 4 hours. It's no longer going to be 4 hours, but now it's going to be less than 4 hours. When we consider the video on indirect variation alone, we'll see how we're going to calculate these things. And if the driver should decide to reduce the speed, let's say from 80 kilometers per hour to 60 kilometers per hour, the time will now increase. We are now going to spend more time on the road because the driver has decided to slow down. So that is indirect. The speed varies inversely as the time. That is indirect. If the speed goes up, the time we'll spend on the road will go down. And if the speed should go down, the time we'll spend on the road will go up. Indirect variation. Now think of this other example. Imagine that we're trying to build a house, and then we have 8 people all working at the same rate. 8 people are spending, let's say, 10 days to build a house. 10 days. If we should increase the number of people who are working to 12 people at the same rate, will the number of days increase or decrease? Now we have 4 extra people. We've increased the number of people from 8 to 12. So definitely we are going to have less days. So the days will reduce. If 8 people are taking 10 days, then definitely 12 people are going to take fewer days or less days. Let's imagine that we rather reduced from 8 to 4. We reduce from 8 to 4. What will happen to the number of days? Because the number of people working because the number of people who are working has reduced, then the days that will be spent will now increase. They're going to spend more days working. That is indirect. When the number of people working increases, the days spent will reduce, and when the number of people working reduces, the days spent to work will increase. Now let's talk about joint variation. Joint variation. You see, sometimes one quantity may not depend on just one quantity. Sometimes a quantity may depend on 2 or even more quantities. For instance, we spoke about our health. Now, our health does not only depend on what we eat, but let me write it well, sorry. It does not only depend on our diet, but it also depends on our sleep and many other things, but we want to just focus on these 2. So our health depends on our sleep and our diet. So if we don't eat well, let's imagine you don't eat enough food in a day, then it's going to affect your health. Your health will go down. Let's imagine you eat too much, then that is also going to affect your health. So now your health depends on these 2 things, this and that. Sometimes also your diet will also depend on, your diet may also depend on your health. For instance, you may have a health condition which may require that you eat certain types of food. So then your health is going to determine what you're going to eat. And then what you're going to eat will also determine your health. And your sleep. If you sleep enough, or if you sleep well, then your health is going to improve. If you don't sleep well, if you sleep for just 2 hours in a day, then definitely your health will go down. So that is variation. I mean, one quantity changing will affect the other. If you eat well, you don't sleep well, it's going to affect your health. If you sleep well, you don't eat well, it's going to affect your health. that I'm sure you can think of many other examples. Let's imagine that, let's take another example. Probably you get what I'm saying. Let's think about John. Let's think about John, someone we are calling John. So John has two parents. John has two parents, his dad and his mom. Now, John is a student, so he goes to school. His dad gives him some money, and his mom also gives him some money. So when John is going to school, he has some money in his pocket. Now, let's imagine that his mother's income should increase. That may affect the income that John is going to get. So John may now have more income, and that will also affect how John is going to spend. So John's spending, or even John's income, depends on these two people, his mom and his dad. If his dad's income should reduce, that is also going to affect John's income. So how John spend, or what John is going to spend on, or the money that will be in John's pocket, depends on two people, his dad and his mom. So that is also joint variation. You can talk of many other things like the volume of a cylinder. These are things we'll talk more about when we take specific videos on the types of variation. Now let's talk about partial variation. Partial variation. Let me write it well. Partial variation. All right. Now we know that we've already said that for variation, where one quantity increases is going to cause an increase in the other, or a decrease in the other. I mean, one quantity depends on the other quantity, so that a change in one quantity is going to cause a change in the other. Now with partial variation, it's a special type of variation, which is helping us see that sometimes when a quantity changes, it doesn't mean that the other quantity will also change entirely. Some parts of the other quantity may be constant, will not change, and then some parts will change. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that your income should increase. Naturally, your expenditure will also increase. But now let's think of this. Is it everything that you spend on that is going to increase when your income increases? No. Because let's imagine that your income has increased. There are certain things that you're going to buy now. Probably you're going to buy new clothes. Even the things that you eat, you're going to change them. Probably you're going to spend more money on some kind of food. But now think of this. Just because your income has increased, are you going to eat more salt? Just because your income has increased, are you going to eat more salt? Because I have more money and I'm going to eat a lot of salt every day. Is that what you're going to do? No, definitely not. Because your income has increased, are you going to say that at the end of the month I'm going to pay double bills just because I have more money? When they give me the bills, I'm going to pay more? No. Unless your bills actually increase, there are certain things you're not going to spend more money on just because you have more money. Just because your income has increased, you're not going to say that I'm going to drink 5 gallons of water a day. No. You're still going to consume that amount no matter the amount of money you have. If your income should decrease, the amount of salt you eat will probably not change. It's going to be the same unless you can't even afford to buy salt at all. But usually some parts of the thing that we spend on will remain constant. So that is partial variation. When one quantity changes, it is going to cause a change in the other, but not a complete change. Some parts will be constant, some parts will not be constant. So that is partial variation. Some parts will change, but some parts will still remain constant. It is an interesting type of variation. I like it so much, and we'll enjoy it when we take it into details. Now, in today's lesson, we've seen what variation is. We spoke about variation. We said it is when a quantity and another quantity are related in such a way that a change in one is going to cause a change in the other. So when quantities are related, one changes is going to affect the other. We call that variation. We mentioned the types of variation. We spoke about direct variation. We spoke about inverse variation. We spoke about joint variation. And then we spoke about partial variation. We used some examples to explain these types of variation. In our next video, we'll take them one after the other, and then we'll solve more questions on them, so that we'll see how, when we face real life situations like these, we'll see how we're going to solve them. But what I want you to do now is that I gave you some examples on direct variation. I gave you some examples of inverse, joint, and partial. So now you sit down, think of some practical real life situations that are direct variation and write them down. Think of real life situations that are indirect or inverse. We said inverse is also called indirect. We said inverse is also called indirect. Let me write the indirect. Indirect. Sorry, let me change the color. Indirect. So think of real life situations that are indirect. Think of real life situations that are joint variation, and then think of others that are partial. This will really help you when you have word problems. Sometimes a question may not tell you that this is a joint variation, this is inverse variation, this is direct. Looking at the problem itself, when you're able to think it through and see the relation between the quantities, it will help you see what type of variation it is. So I want you to spend time to think of real life situations and then classify them under direct, indirect, joint, or partial. Please, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do subscribe. I know you'll enjoy our next videos. Please give it a thumbs up if you like the video, and then share for others to also come to know about our channel and learn more and improve in their mathematics. Thanks for watching the video. I'll meet you in our next lesson.